You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
A lot of Chicago Bears fans were, let's say, underwhelmed by the three finalists currently scheduled for second interviews for the Chicago Bears head coaching position. But I think this is a group that can be really something to look into, a group with some real potential once you get over the idea that, yeah, there's no real shiny, sexy candidate, but still a potential solid group of coaches the Bears are trying to decide between. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our Locked On Bears YouTube video podcast as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. On the show today, we check in on, so far, the three finalists for the Bears head coaching search. There could potentially be more coaches that get second interviews in the coming days, but for now, things just seem to be a little bit more settled on three: Matt Eberflus, Jim Caldwell, and Dan Quinn. We'll get to know the three candidates, and I think why none of them are truly bad options, even if they're not, the exciting, young, upstart, up-and-coming offensive guru, genius, Justin Fields fixer that you might want them to be. This doesn't mean they're bad coaches. And I think there's a lot to like about any of the three of them and how the Bears might be looking at them as potential head coaches. Now, clearly the Bill Polian influence is strong here, but I think the key context here that I take away from it is that the head coaching candidate pool as a whole is not loaded with consensus strong top candidates, right? Obviously, Brian Daboll is the hot name after the Buffalo Bills' big offensive outburst in their playoff loss to the Chiefs. And it kind of feels like for a lot of Bears fans, anyone who's not Brian Daboll is all of a sudden going to be a disappointment. I mean, Byron Leftwich, Brian is still in there too, as another one of these sort of offensive coordinator names that Bears fans could maybe get a little bit more fired up about. And I think part of the problem is that two of these three names are defensive coordinators, and the offensive coach in there hasn't been an offensive coach in a few seasons in the NFL. So we really haven't seen him in a little while really commanding an offense, as we've seen how he might apply, say, Justin Fields to that sort of thing. And I think that's part of where this feeling among Bears fans comes. But I think there's a lot to like about these coaches. So let's start with Matt Eberflus, because he was the first one to be announced to be getting a second interview. That one coming, I believe, tomorrow, Wednesday, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. He is, of course, the Colts defensive coordinator, and he's had a straightforward path to the NFL. He's grew up in Toledo, Ohio, played college football at the University of Toledo, then came on as a graduate assistant coach at Toledo, worked his way up the Toledo coaching staff. And one of the years he played there, he played under head coach Nick Saban. So he's got some of those Alabama defensive roots buried in there. And then I believe replacing him was Gary Pinkel, who went on to be the head coach at Missouri. And so Eberflus ends up coaching at Missouri after working his way up the coaching staff at Toledo, was the defensive coordinator at Missouri for 8 years there. Really a lot of stability at that spot, and coached some pretty good defenses at Missouri while they were still in the Big 12, which is, we don't think of Big 12 as having a ton of great defenses, and not that he was, top in the country, but all things considered, did a pretty good job there for the most part, with some ups and downs, but certainly a lot of stability there. Makes the jump after, like I said, 8 years or so there to the NFL with the Cleveland Browns under Rob Ryan, follows Rob Ryan as the defensive coordinator to the Cowboys. And there again, Eberflus, and I'm still not sure on the pronunciation there, Eberflus. I'll probably say both on the podcast throughout, and someone will inevitably correct me, or I'll hear it corrected a couple different times, and then eventually I'll get it through my skull. But regardless, follows Rob Ryan to Dallas, stays there for 7 years as a linebackers coach. Rob Ryan leaves for the Saints, Eberflus stays. I think they had 1 year of Monty Kiffin as their defensive coordinator, and then former Bears defensive coordinator Rod Marinelli takes over as their defensive coordinator, keeps Eberflus as his linebackers coach, and a particularly important coaching role as they transition from Rob Ryan's 3-4 to Rod Marinelli's 4-3. Coaching the linebackers is where you're going to see some of the most change there, certainly for the guys on the outside, as opposed to, going from the edge rushers to the off-ball linebackers, and how those roles are definitely going to change. Of course, as a linebackers coach in Dallas, coached DeMarcus Ware, Sean Lee, Rolando McClain, Anthony Hitchens, Anthony Spencer's, a bunch of others. After being linebackers coach there, Josh McDaniels gets hired as the Colts head coach and hires Eberflus to be his defensive coordinator. McDaniels then backs out, and Frank Reich opts to keep Eberflus as his defensive coordinator, even though that was first picked by McDaniels. But GM Chris Ballard was really big on keeping Eberflus there, really seemed to like him, and it's worked out pretty well. He came in to fix what Chuck Pagano had kind of left behind as a defense really kind of not doing well, broken, maybe in ruins is a strong word, but ranking near the bottom of the NFL. Year one, Eberflus comes in, top 10 defense. Year two, they lose Andrew Luck. Everything kind of drops off there, sort of surprisingly, and they definitely had a fall down for sure. But then the last two seasons, top 10 defense in 2020, top 10 defense in 2021. So you have Eberflus then, pretty good track record here as a defensive coordinator for the Colts. Longtime linebackers coaching the NFL. Multiple coordinators seem to keep him and want him around. Of course, a college defensive coordinator did a pretty good job. Very sort of scheme versatile, working from the 3-4 and the 4-3, studied under Saban and some of those pattern match concepts. Certainly Rod Marinelli and the Lovie Smith tree in there too. Rob Ryan, more of an aggressive 3-4. So he's gotten like a wide mix of schemes that he's coached under, and he's able to do a lot of different things. He seems to be very innovative and really well-liked, beloved, respected in the coaching community. And for me, his resume really follows how you typically want to see a coaching candidate rise up. You go from college position coach to college defensive coordinator, earn your stripes there, then you earn your stripes as an NFL position coach for a while, prove yourself, then become an NFL defensive coordinator for, at least a handful of years, and again, show consistent, solid growth. That's sort of the vertical path to succeed in every stop on your way up. You haven't seen him go up and then back down and up and then back down and succeed and then fail. And it's like he's had bumps and adversity along the way, but he hasn't had those outright fired for being bad and then gets a second chance type thing. He's been consistently improving over time as a coach, and one of those guys who I think has coached a lot of players to be better than maybe what their talent might suggest. Colts defense has not been riddled with household names. I mean, Darius Leonard, of course, at linebacker, and then they got sort of the cast off Xavier Rhodes from the Vikings. Ended the career of Justin Houston for a little bit there. They traded for DeVorest Buckner from the 49ers. They have a couple of guys, but it's not a star-studded Colts defense, and he's got them playing at a top 10 level for multiple seasons. I mean, that really sort of is the culmination of that type of young upstart defensive coordinator candidate that you might be looking for in a vacuum. It's separate from the whole Justin Fields thing with maybe wanting an offensive guy for him specifically. In a vacuum, Eberflus seems like a fine candidate, and it's why he seems to be maybe one of the favorites. I mean, the Bill Polian connection, of course, from the Colts seems to be a pretty strong one for him, but not the only coach on this search with strong Bill Polian connections to the Indianapolis Colts. Check in on the resume really of Jim Caldwell, and one that I think he's probably the most underwhelming for Bears fans, but I think it's worth giving him a real objective chance. Next on Locked On Bears. Our friends over at BetOnline.ag have had prop betting odds on who's going to be the next Chicago Bears head coach. But even if you don't want to try and guess that game, they've got some other fun prop bets available right now, including Aaron Rodgers bets. If you want to revel in that a little bit more, you can currently bet whether he's going to be on the Packers next season in week 1 of 2022. Currently, the betting favorite says no. You can bet on whether or not he'll retire. That's betting favorite to not retire there. You can also bet on which team he will play for if not the Green Bay Packers. Your best odds there are Broncos and Steelers, followed by, a number of other teams with a wide variety of outcomes there. Plus, you can bet on the NFL playoff games as well if you want to make those games a little bit more exciting for you. I'm telling you, BetOnline is the number one place we recommend for all of your sport betting needs. Sign up today for a free account and enter in our promo code LOCKEDON, and they're going to give you a free 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. That's free money, them just giving it to you with your deposit to play with and win at BetOnline, where the game starts. Jim Caldwell's an interesting candidate for the Bears head coaching job, given that he coached for the Lions, given that he went to the Super Bowl with the Colts, and given that he hasn't coached in the NFL in like 3 or 4 seasons, but still keeps popping up for these head coaching interviews. And the other interesting thing about him is that NFL Network's Mike Garafolo reported just this week that Bill Polian potentially is pushing for Eberflus as Bears head coach, with Caldwell perhaps as his offensive coordinator, to rekindle a couple of Colts connections there to start building this Bears coaching staff. That Caldwell would be the one to look after Fields and run things that way with Polian's blessing, with Eberflus still as sort of the young ascending head coach over top of him. And I certainly don't hate that idea, but I think it's an interesting pathway for Caldwell there. And we can get into this a little bit more, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what Caldwell is looking for. It seems like Caldwell is waiting for the right opportunity. And is that what he's been waiting for? It's a little bit hard to tell. And, I will say this about Jim Caldwell on the front end, is that I might have a slight Caldwell bias in his favor. It's not anything drastic, but I do like to be transparent about these sort of things. I have met Jim Caldwell a couple of times. I've covered some events he's done in his hometown. Seems like a very nice guy. Actually, a friend of mine, his family has been longtime family friends with the Caldwells. They used to go to Colts games a lot when he was the Colts head coach. I think some Lions games as well. So I don't know him personally all that well. I certainly don't have any inside information or really anything extra above and beyond I can glean. I do know he's a very good person, a genuine human being. He and his wife are very good in the community. They care a lot about, especially like initiatives for low-income people and people of color. They've really invested a lot in those types of initiatives in his small hometown. And he's very much a guy who does not take a lot of credit for things, right? His name is not front and center. It's not former NFL coach Jim Caldwell does this. It's like, here's an event. And when you dig a little bit deeper, you see in sort of the credits at the bottom that, oh, Jim Caldwell was involved in that. Like, he's not a flashy, showy, give me a lot of credit for all the good I do in the community type guy. He's very much a do good and not take a lot of credit for it. Just do good because it's the right thing to do. He's a right thing to do type of person. I have a lot of respect for Jim Caldwell, the human being. And that's where I guess that's the extent of my bias there is that, I mean, unlike Matt Eberflus or Dan Quinn, I have actually spent limited amounts of time around Jim Caldwell. And he is from, 30 minutes from where I grew up. So that's about as far as the bias will go there. So I will put that on the front end, but I think I'm still able to objectively look at him as a coach on the field, which is very much a sort of mixed bag there, right? He's a little bit older than the other two candidates we're talking about here, a much longer coaching experience, longtime assistant in college, coached quarterbacks and wide receivers for a while, and then was the head coach at Wake Forest for 8 years. Really poor win-loss record there. I think they had one season where they went to the bowl game and a lot of 1, 2, 3, and 4 win years there. Did not go well, but they set some school records for passing offense. They were a high-flying run and gun. Well, not really run. They were terrible rushing teams, but really strong passing games at Wake Forest. And it's interesting because he went from being the Penn State quarterback coach to the Wake Forest head coach. And I kind of wonder if maybe that was too big of a jump and maybe it was too soon. Of course, kind of makes sense that they could pass the ball well because he was always coaching quarterbacks and wide receivers, but maybe not ready to be a full college head coach at that point. But he was there for 8 years. They certainly gave him quite a bit of run, but then makes a jump to the NFL from there as Tony Dungy's quarterback coach, 1 year in Tampa, the rest of the time in Indianapolis, and really takes over as assistant head coach. And you could tell Dungy was sort of grooming him over time to be his heir as the Colts head coach. But again, he makes the jump from quarterback coach to head coach. He's now, when he took over as the Colts head coach, I believe if my math is correct, he had coached for 30 years up to that point, from 77 to 2008 or so. He had never been an offensive coordinator specifically in those 30 years. I mean, I think he ran the offense at Wake Forest, but had never held the offensive coordinator role for those 30 years and even beyond as he took over as the Colts head coach. Of course, Bill Polian, his general manager the entire time in Indianapolis. And after Caldwell becomes head coach, Polian adds the title of team president as well. So very clearly a strong connection for those two teams. And as we know, Caldwell takes over as head coach. Colts start the season 14-0 with Payton. They end up losing the last 2 games. Polian directed him to sit their starters for the final 2 games. Kind of a controversial thing, but they go on all the way to the Super Bowl. So did the 2 games of rest there really cost them that much? Probably not. But lose to the Saints in the Super Bowl, I guess, iffy. But then year 2, they go 10-6. They win the AFC North again. They do lose to the Jets in the first playoff game they played that season, the Mark Sanchez, Rex Ryan Jets, I believe. In that, it would have been like 2011 or so, right around there. So, some drop up there. And then year 3 is Peyton Manning neck injury, misses the whole season. Colts go 2-14, get the number 1 pick. Caldwell fired, Polian fired, reset in Indianapolis. They draft Andrew Luck, et cetera, et cetera. And so we talked about this a little bit, was it last week, about how certainly no one's giving Jim Caldwell full credit for inheriting Tony Dungy's team and going 14-2 to the Super Bowl, right? That wasn't all Jim Caldwell, but not any coach could just step in there and win 14 straight games. I mean, just very few coaches have been able to do that ever. You know what I mean? Let alone to say that, well, Caldwell doesn't deserve any credit for going 14-2. No, he did something. He clearly did something there. He clearly led that team and, was intimately involved in them having that success that not just anyone could have won 14 games. Maybe a lot of coaches could have won 10 games with Peyton Manning that season. Sure. Plenty, you didn't take a genius head coach have some success with Manning, but to go 14-0 to start that season took something involving Jim Caldwell's influence. Similarly, on the other end, you can't blame Jim Caldwell for going 2-14 when you take Peyton Manning out of the equation. Yes, would you have wanted Caldwell to do better than 2 wins? Sure. But was he going to do better than 4 or 5? Probably not. I mean, I don't know how many coaches could lose Peyton Manning like that and, do any better than 4 or 5 wins. So you can't give Caldwell the full blame for going 2-14 in the same way that you can't give him the full credit for going to the Super Bowl either. But regardless, it's enough to fire him. Enough to fire Bill Polian. Goes to the Ravens as quarterbacks coach. They fire their OC midseason. He becomes interim offensive coordinator, and then they go to the Super Bowl. They win the Super Bowl with Joe Flacco at quarterback. There's something. I mean, again, does he give the full credit for leading Flacco to the Super Bowl? No, but I think he deserves quite a bit of it, especially when they fire their OC and they instantly get better on offense with Caldwell taking over. I think that was his first offensive coordinator gig, actually, legitimate, just offensive coordinator position. Wins the Super Bowl with Joe Flacco. Offense drops off a little bit the second year, but then he's the Lions head coach from there. It takes them to 11-5 in the year 1. It's their best record in 2 decades. 1991 was their best record since the early 90s. Make the playoffs, losing the wild card. Then 7-9, 9-7, 9-7. Apparently fired for not being good enough in Detroit after 3 out of 4 winning seasons and second in the division those 3 or 4 winning seasons. A couple of trips to the playoffs for something that the Lions really struggled to do. I mean, his offenses in Detroit were not ranking in the top of the NFL, but had a couple of coordinators who were really well respected. Jim Bob Cooter, the offensive coordinator. Terrell Austin, the defensive coordinator, longtime defensive coordinator with a lot of respect around the NFL. I met Terrell Austin at the Senior Bowl a couple of times. All the coaches dap him up. Everybody loves him. He was really nice to me too. A couple of times that I talked to him, just genuine down to earth guy. So he seems to be able to pick coordinators pretty well. He's been kind of a consultant since there. He was briefly, I think, helping out with the Dolphins, but given that he hasn't coached in, 3 or 4 years, I am curious, how well he's still in tune with modern NFL offenses, right? It's one thing to be on a staff somewhere and breaking down tape every week and preparing for opponents or whatever, but to be out of the league, you can still watch tape and keep up with some stuff. But I just wonder, that's one of the things that's going to be in that interview is how much he's been keeping up, how well he's been keeping up, and what his ideas are to stay fresh and innovative and up to date with NFL offenses. I don't mind that as a head coaching candidate. He's very much more the CEO, team leader type as opposed to the offensive coordinator, innovator guy who's going to come in and have this brilliant, perfect scheme for Fields, right? Not to say that he won't have a good scheme for Fields, but he's not going to be as known for fresh, he's not going to be the Brian Daboll type. He's going to be more the Jim Harbaugh type of leading the organization and having a strong identity and those types of things, as opposed to being the offensive, innovative genius like Matt Nagy or others. So I can see where it's very underwhelming for Bears fans, and maybe for Bears fans, it might be easier to stomach him as an offensive coordinator under someone like Eberflus, as opposed to make him the head coach. But I think he's got a pretty strong resume, and I don't think he gets enough credit for the good that he has done as a coach. I think he's a genuinely good person. Maybe that's partially my bias with him, but I don't mind Jim Caldwell. It's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not exciting, but he could be a very good coach, and at least give you some more stability and kind of right the ship a little bit more here. I mean, it's none of these candidates are perfect. None of them are, the sexy home run pick that's a consensus. Everybody loves this guy. So you kind of have to pick what exactly you like, the pros and cons you like, the pros you like the most, the cons you don't mind the least, and whose mixture of things really suits you the best. And I can see why a lot of people are coming around on Dan Quinn a little bit more. He's the third of the finalists so far. I'll kind of check in on where he's done well and where he's struggled in his coaching career next on Locked On Bears. Hey, Bears fans, I want to tell you about an incredible app for anyone who buys gasoline. Anytime you fill up any kind of vehicle or even a small engine, I guess, with gasoline, you go to the pump. It's called GetUpside. And Locked On Bears listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time. Just download from the App Store or Google Play and enter in our promo code Touchdown, and you're going to get 25 cents per gallon or more on your fill-ups. Cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore, especially with the way gas prices went up and they're coming back down. But where exactly they're going to be? GetUpside can help you keep more of that cash in your pocket. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year, $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime if you want to direct deposit in your bank account. You can do it through PayPal or even do like an e-gift card for Amazon or other online retailers. So it's super easy to use. All you got to do is download the free GetUpside app, enter in our promo code Touchdown, and you're going to get 25 cents per gallon in cash back or more when you fill up. Again, promo code Touchdown when you download the GetUpside app. You can see where some of the upside might be with someone like Dan Quinn as a potential Bears head coach. And it's interesting because he's the only one who doesn't have the Bill Polian bias or Bill Polian seal of approval. I mean, we don't know what Bill Polian thinks about Dan Quinn, but like he's the one who hasn't worked with Bill Polian, or I guess been a part of Bill Polian's, ecosystem of the Colts, right? He's the only one who hasn't coached for the Colts and been a part of a Bill Polian team as far as we can tell. But Quinn, he was a defensive line coach for a while in the NFL, 49ers, Dolphins, Jets. I will say the Dolphins year under Nick Saban. So he's got some of that tree. And again, has been under Mike Nolan, I think, in with the 49ers, and might have been Rex Ryan with the Jets. It might have been a little bit before then. No, it was Mangini's Jets under Bob Sutton, who went on to be the Chiefs defensive coordinator, I believe. And then he comes to Seattle as the defensive line coach, first under Gus Bradley. And, the sort of the earliest years of the Legion of Boom Seahawks defense, he was in charge of that defensive line, the Michael Bennett. I'm struggling to remember defensive line, but it was a very strong truth. They have Cliff Averill at that time, or was he still with the Lions? Regardless, strong defensive lines help be that Legion of Boom defense. Jumps down to be the Florida defensive coordinator for a couple of seasons. And then when Gus Bradley is hired away to be the Jacksonville Jaguars head coach, it's Quinn who gets the call back up. Pete Carroll calls and says, we want you to take over as our defensive coordinator. First season he's back as now DC for the first time in his career. Seahawks go to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl, 2013. He didn't build that defense per se. It was Gus Bradley's defense first. He was coaching the defensive line, but he didn't build that secondary at least. But when Quinn takes over in 2013, that Seahawks defense was the first defense since the 1985 Chicago Bears to finish the season first in points allowed, first in yards allowed, and first in turnovers. So that's not nothing, right? I mean, again, kind of like Caldwell with the Colts offense. Do you give Quinn all the credit for that? No, but the previous guy wasn't able to do it nearly as well, or at least that statistically impressive as it was until Quinn did it. So wins the Super Bowl in 2013, goes back to the Super Bowl in 2014. They lose to the Patriots. And in that case, you killed Dan Quinn when really it was Pete Carroll and his offense that didn't pass on the goal line. They handed off to Marshawn Lynch. I mean, we don't got to rehash that whole Super Bowl, but the Quinn defense wasn't really fully the problem there. Could have done better, but was not really fully the problem in that second Super Bowl. And of course, taking a defense back-to-back Super Bowls is part of why we see that Legion of Boom Seahawks defense as, one of the best of the modern era, if not one of the best of all time. Again, not here to have that debate, but they're in that discussion at the very least. And that's good enough to get Dan Quinn hired as head coach for the first time by the Atlanta Falcons. And, smart enough to hire Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator. Again, as far as being able to pick good potential candidates there. I mean, he did a good job there. His defensive coordinator never really went on to do much, but that offensive coaching staff also had Matt LaFleur as one of the assistants. I don't remember if it was quarterback's coach or what, but like it was a good offensive coaching staff. He was able to sort of pluck there and get good years out of Matt Ryan as a result. Second year in Atlanta, back to the Super Bowl. I mean, he's 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, at least appearances. Of course, they lose to the Patriots in that game, and really they blow a 28-3 lead. And there's some very big questions for Dan Quinn in my interview, if I'm interviewing for head coach, about what went wrong when you gave up the 28-3 lead over the Patriots in the Super Bowl. One of many of the questions I think I would have for Dan Quinn. And it's just interesting in Atlanta, like his defense is never really statistically ranked all that well. I mean, 1 or 2 years in the top 10 range, but like the rest of the time, below average, really, defenses. And I chalk some of that up to the scheme. Like he was still trying to run a lot of the Seahawks stuff early on there, and the NFL had kind of adapted to beating that. And he was kind of slow, I thought, to adapt out of the single deep cover 3 type defense. And then along with that, the Falcons were never able to really get great personnel to run that defense, right? I mean, when you don't have the Richard Sherman and you don't have the Bobby Wagner, and you don't have Errol Thomas on the back end and Cam Chancellor, right? I mean, it's hard to replicate that. And I don't know that the Falcons did a great job of giving him the players with the right skill sets to truly replicate that defense, in addition to the defense sort of aging poorly at that time. So then, they start 1-7 in 2019, and they start 0-5 in 2020 and gets fired early in that season, or early-ish, fired at the same time as the GM. They clean house, and he finishes as his head coaching record is 43-42, like 1 game over 500. It's not really all that impressive. He only had 2 seasons above 500. One went to the Super Bowl, of course, but like that's not a great track record as a head coach. So then last year was his first year as the Cowboys defensive coordinator. Great turnaround, really well coached, top 10 group. Scheme looks brand new, innovative, adaptive, fits the personnel so much better. They just looked really well coached. They led the NFL in interceptions, which is not sustainable, but it is something to get back to that point. And Trevon Diggs was a big part of that. So it's like all of a sudden after 2021, Quinn looks like a changed man, changed coach, right? He's changed his scheme entirely, seems to have learned a lot, at least defensively, from what he did in Atlanta and Seattle, and has that versatility. So like that's all seems very good. And reports have been that in these head coaching interviews that he's had with multiple teams, the Giants, the Broncos, and the Bears have all been like intentionally interviewing him, that reportedly he's had really good answers about what he would do differently this time as a head coach, how he's learned, how he's grown, not only in defense, but in leading teams and all that stuff. So like, that's all very good. I wonder if 1 year as a defensive coordinator for the Cowboys is enough to convince me. You know what I mean? Like, of course, he'll say all the right things in the interview, but as a head coach, if you're 2 years in and the going gets tough, will you revert back to certain things? Do I truly believe that everything you've learned it has changed? I just feel like with Quinn, I'd feel so much better about it if we were 2 or 3 or 4 years of him as a defensive coordinator for the Cowboys, and they were 2 or 3 or 4 years of his defenses being really good again, and feeling like, okay, he's definitely learned something. It's settled in, and he's like, it's very hammered home of what he needs to do to be the better coach than what we saw in Atlanta. But it's just hard after 1 year to really feel like he's for sure changed. I mean, not that I'm trying not to like assume he hasn't changed, but it's just, I don't know. I'd like a little bit more evidence there, just for how mediocre they were in Atlanta, just defensively especially, but just as a team overall too. It's just, he was so good in Seattle. So it's like, yes, he's proved it before, but as a head coach, is he a good defensive coordinator and a bad head coach, right? I need more proof, perhaps, that things have changed. And without interviewing him ourselves, it's really hard to know that. So he does seem like a particularly popular candidate among these other teams, and I think the Bears included in that. He has to be saying some things right and have some really good ideas. So that's why I'm willing to give him some of that benefit of the doubt and see him as like, yeah, if he's really learned and adapted, that maybe that second chance as a head coach could really be what he needs, because he's seen what it takes to get to the Super Bowl and defensive coordinator win the Super Bowl. And we've seen a lot of those coaches that like have some success with their first team and then come to their second team and really figure it out, right? It's hard to predict exactly what leads to that, but Quinn has some of that potential as well. So like all 3 of these coaching candidates have some real potential to be successful. They all have some warts, but all of the candidates have warts. Even Brian Daboll has warts. I personally have some concerns that Daboll is good offensive coordinator, not great head coach. And I'm curious to see how that plays out with whatever team ends up hiring him, if any team ends up hiring him this time around. And none of these coaches, other than maybe like Sean Payton, seem like surefire home runs. So I think you should give these candidates the benefit of the doubt, or at least open up your mind to the possibility that maybe they could be good, because none of the candidates are truly all that successful, and just trying to be too disappointed in these guys. Hear them out a little bit. Not that we should fully trust what Bill Polian and George McCaskey are doing, but like, I don't hate these guys as candidates. I really don't. I think there's something to like there, and I don't think it's necessarily like falling into the same Matt Nagy pitfalls that they did, or falling into the John Fox pitfalls, right? It's at least some things that feel a little bit different and have some potential for success. No matter how the Bears go in the GM and head coaching search, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you 5 days a week right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. If you're looking for a second listen, don't forget the rest of our Locked On Chicago sports podcasts: Locked On Bulls, Locked On Cubs, Locked On White Sox, Locked On Blackhawks, all here on the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you your team every day. And every day, my goal is to help you bear down.